Hello and welcome to the Rogers Brief. I'm Adam Rogers. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. Today is day 45 of the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings, and I'm a little late getting to my summary today. I was otherwise engaged, actually quite literally in a sense, on the board of directors, the provincial board of Engaged Nova Scotia, and we had our AGM annual meeting today at Summer Street Industries in New Glasgow, and so I was there for the day. Great meetings, wonderful organization. People might be familiar with it from the quality of life survey, very extensive survey, 200 and some questions, but I think it was about 12,000 responses across the province. So a great data set on quality of life in different areas of the province. So I was there for the day, and so I got to watch the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings this evening, and now just getting my thoughts together for a summary for day 45. So today was focused on a history of violence, and a history of violence by the perpetrator that was in large respects ignored by the police and by people that were aware of what was going on. So we heard two things. There was a foundational document presentation on some of the incidents with people other than his spouse, where Wortman had a pattern of violent behavior. And then we heard from Brenda Forbes, a former neighbor of Gabriel Wortman in Portapique. She was next door neighbors, her and her husband George, both retired from the military, long careers, 30 and 40 years respectively in the military. Had retired to Portapique and had hoped to live out their retirement there, but for reasons I'll talk about in a little bit, they ended up moving first to Halifax, and then when they realized that Wortman actually had a business in Dartmouth and was around the city some, they ended up moving out west and are now in Alberta. So first there was, so I was listening to all of this today, and Wortman's behavior pattern was basically with men. He was violent physically, wouldn't take much to set him off, sometimes seemed to be looking for a fight and picking fights. And then with women, he was aggressive sexually and seemed to have a pattern of trying to be aggressive, using financial means to try to entice women, and then if they rejected him, he'd get very upset about things, and very, very unpleasant to everybody, really. Although, anyway, and I'm sure we'll hear more about this, he would be able to, at first, initially when he was going out on dates with people, and he would get dates, he could be charming at first, but things would always seemingly end up taking a turn for the worse. So I was listening to all of this and thinking in each case, well, could more have been done by somebody, by whether it's by the police hearing a complaint, or by citizens who maybe should have called the police or done something further. So I'll talk about some of that, what happened, and just some of the incidents from what we heard today. There's some news articles too from the Halifax Examiner in particular that I was reading and I wanted to mention, and a little bit more political news as well. Brenda Lucky's name and further emails disclosing different things, and so there's more talk in Ottawa about alleged political pressure, and so there'll be some fallout for that, I suspect. All right, so I'm going to start actually with Brenda Forbes. The foundational document was presented first and her testimony came second, but hers was really key, I thought. Miss Forbes, her and her husband had built a home which ended up being purchased by John Zoll and Joanne Thomas, who were victims of Wortman's shooting spree. Their home was burned down as well. It's emerging, or you would conclude after hearing from Miss Forbes that probably Wortman was directing his ire more at the house itself than Mr. Zoll and Miss Thomas, although we may learn more about that scenario. But really seemed to have animosity towards the Forbeses, and so I'll talk about that a little bit first. They met Wortman, who came after they did to Portapique, and didn't really like him right away. He knew they were military, so he kept trying to entice them into getting him weapons. How do you get firearms or ammunition, which they refused to do. Thought he drank too much, Wortman that is, and didn't like being around him when he was. So now George Forbes saw some unlocked firearms with magazines in them, so ready to be fired, very unsafely stored. Felt he probably should have reported them at that time and regrets not having done so. This was early in their acquaintanceship, I guess you'd say. Wortman had also told George about his history of cigarette smuggling while in university. He seems to have told that story to a few people. Now, but there were 3 incidents that Miss Forbes described, and in each case, you could see where further intervention, taking things a little bit further, may have had some important consequences. So, first one, Miss Banfield, after suffering an assault at the hands of Wortman, went next door and to Brenda Forbes because she couldn't get in her own vehicle. Wortman had blocked Miss Banfield's vehicle in. So, she runs over to Miss Forbes' house, having obviously suffered some injuries. Miss Forbes tells her, listen, you need to get help. You need to seek help. I can help you. People can help you. We can keep you safe. Miss Banfield says no, and she ended up going back. No police involvement there. Okay, so that was one thing. Afterwards, Wortman didn't appreciate Miss Forbes's involvement. Involuntary though it may have been, unreasonable as his view may have been, of course. Second incident was where Miss Forbes had told Glenn Wortman, who was an uncle of Gabriel Wortman, who unfortunately now has dementia and is unable to testify or be interviewed. He was interviewed. I know I heard him speaking in the Global News podcast series of 13 hours. But he was deteriorating even at that point, so it wouldn't be a witness at this stage. But Miss Forbes had told Glenn Wortman about Gabriel Wortman having cheated on Miss Banfield regularly, bringing girls from Truro to Portapique to the cottage. So Glenn got drunk, told Gabriel about what Brenda Forbes had told him. Gabriel Wortman goes over, threatens Brenda Forbes at that point, and then Miss Banfield is to have no further contact with Miss Forbes after that. So, obviously very controlling, disturbing behavior there. The third one was Brenda Forbes was told by Glenn Wortman that Glenn, had witnessed Gabriel choking Miss Banfield in front of himself and 2 other men on the property, I think the warehouse property. And so Miss Forbes called the police and told them about it. They came to see her at the cadet camp in De Bert, where Miss Forbes was working at the time. And so they said, well, you weren't a witness to this, which is true. It would be hearsay on her part. So we need an actual witness. So Miss Forbes calls up Glenn and puts him on speakerphone with the police listening. And Glenn Wortman says, no way am I going to cooperate. If I do, Gabriel will kill me. And he's killed other people. And so I'm not going to cooperate. All right. So Miss Forbes also says she tells the police at this point that Wortman has firearms and he's a dangerous guy. So the police do nothing about this. Constable Troy Maxwell, who we're going to hear from later on in the proceedings, denies that there was a domestic violence complaint made at that time, although we've seen his notes and they are completely consistent with what Miss Forbes has outlined. So we'll see what happens when he comes to testify. After this, Gabriel Wortman started stalking Brenda Forbes, really terrorized her when her husband George was away. He was doing work in Africa, You know, she wouldn't park in her driveway. She didn't want him to know she was around. Sounds like he was really terrorizing her. And eventually the Forbeses sold their home, moved to Halifax, lost $100,000 in doing so, but had to get out of there. Then they saw Wortman in Halifax one day, found out they had a business in Dartmouth, and then left the province altogether. So very dramatic moves on their part to get away from this man. So the question I have about this is, well, would any of that evidence at the time have supported a search warrant by the police, justified a granting of a search warrant? The first, the threats early on, of course, if George Forbes had understood at the time, what was going on and reported to the police unsafe storage of firearms, well, yes, that would have, a contemporaneous complaint, police could have gone in and searched. That didn't happen, of course. But the real one though is when Miss Forbes is on speakerphone with the police talking to Glenn Wortman, and the police hear his explanation. No, I'm not going to do it because he'll kill me. Well, that in itself is some evidence. The police are directly hearing Glenn Wortman, who is saying, no, I'm not going to describe what I've told to the police because I'm fearful. Okay. Well, that plus Miss Forbes telling them about the firearms, I think if that was in a search warrant application, there could have, I think a judge would have granted that search warrant. Would have been worth attempting at least, but the police did not do so. The third one that stuck out, and this is something we've heard from before, heard a little bit more in the foundational document, was this report from Corporal Densmore, Truro police officer, who was approached by an anonymous source to say that Wortman had threatened, he was very upset, this was in 2011, remember, and wanted to kill a police officer. Well, it was outside of Corporal Densmore's jurisdiction. It wasn't in Truro. He had the place in Portapique, he had the place in Halifax, so he put it on the Criminal Intelligence Service of Nova Scotia as a database, as a bulletin. Does not appear that anybody followed up on that bulletin, though dramatic though it may, it certainly would have appeared to me, and I would have thought a police officer would have thought, all right, well, let's check in on this. Doesn't seem like much, if anything, was done on that. So I thought Miss Forbes, so Miss Forbes, if you were watching the testimony, you would have seen that she was shaking. She was having a little bit of memory difficulty, but nothing significant, nothing that took away from her credibility, I didn't think. I thought it was a little bit of a mistake on Emily Hill, the commission lawyer's part, not to address that right away. I mean, it was obvious if you started watching the testimony of Miss Forbes that she was shaking. It looked like she had Parkinson's. What is going on? When there's something obvious like that and you're watching a person, rather than us asking all these questions and wondering, I think it's best to address it right away. Hey, are you nervous? Do you have a condition? What's going on? And allow the witness to explain, this is why I look this way. This is why I'm, flinching or doing whatever. Now, Miss Forbes did mention when she was answering questions from Megan Stevens later on that she had a stutter. And maybe that explained the shaking a little bit. I mean, she's retired, she's elderly now, maybe that's all together. But to me, it would have warranted some kind of an explanation. A minor criticism, really, in the context of everything, but something I think, something I noticed anyway. A few other things I wanted to talk about. One was this really interesting. Now, I've heard this name before. Is Kit McKenzie. And the Halifax Examiner had a story about Kit McKenzie because there was a fire in Pictou, the town of Pictou, about a month before the killings. And there was a suggestion by, I think, a pizza owner that Wortman was there looking for Kit McKenzie. They had, Wortman and McKenzie, a dispute over a property in Fredericton. And it's not quite clear if this is relating to Tom Evans's estate, the lawyer that Wortman was friends with in Fredericton, who left Wortman most of his estate and made Wortman all of an overnight very wealthy man. there was a property there that Kit McKenzie became entitled to own, which Wortman seemed to feel like he should have owned, and was very upset and was going after Kit McKenzie. So that was in March of 2020, this alleged trip, this trip to Pictou. But there's a theory in the Examiner story because, all right, so the morning of the 19th, Wortman, there was video around 6:30 of him going up towards Sean McLeod, Alana Jenkins' home. And then around a little after 9, going back south. The theory from the Examiner is there's enough time to go from that house, because what's he doing there for 3 hours? We don't know, right? The house is lit on fire just before 9 a.m. Tom Bagley comes over, he's killed, and then Wortman drives south and then continues on. The theory is that maybe during that 3 hours, he wasn't at the house. He got in the car, went north, and then drove east towards Pictou, looking for Kit McKenzie. Didn't find him first. Well, Kit McKenzie, I think, is still around. So, very curious. But it's all these property deals that we hear about and the disputes that he had, unreasonable in many cases. There were 2 others that were mentioned, and these were also noted in an article by the Examiner. We've heard about these before, and these were very strange. And I wonder, it seemed like Wortman didn't want to involve lawyers in his deals either. Property deals, you kind of have to. But there was these 2. One was, so when he first bought the place in Portapic, his father, Paul, had to lend him the money to get it, and so Paul Wortman was on the deed. Well, Gabriel Wortman gets all this money from Tom Evans, he pays his father off. His father refuses to take his name off the deed. All right, keep that in mind, because Wortman then does the same thing to his uncle Glenn. Glenn needed some money to buy his place in Portapic. Then Wortman lent him the money, or co-signed. I think he lent him the money, and then wouldn't take his name off. When Glenn Wortman paid him back, wouldn't take his name off. So I'm very curious about how this worked mechanically. I'd be interested to see who the lawyers were involved in those deeds. I could check property online to see, I guess, but the way it usually works in a property deal is everything is held in trust. So, you sell somebody a property, all right, you sign the deed, you hand it to a lawyer, it's held in trust. The other person provides the money. That is also held in trust. And then once everything is in place, the deed is signed, the money is there, the 2 lawyers get in touch with one another. Yes, it's ready to close, good, it's done, and the deed is recorded, the money is released, and everything happens. And you don't run into any of these situations where somebody's like, okay, well, now I'm not signing the deed. Well, you've already signed it before the money is ever transferred. So that's curious kind of 2 disputes there that Wortman was involved with his family. So be curious to see how those really work mechanically. A couple of other things. One was a woman who described a date with Wortman in 2000, and this was peculiar in this way. So she goes back to his apartment in Dartmouth above the dentures clinic, and they're there for a little bit, and all of a sudden, no knock on the door, just somebody walks in, and that somebody is a uniformed RCMP officer. Now, there's no RCMP in Dartmouth. They're policed by the Halifax Regional Police, but there's an RCMP officer walking in, says something like, oh, we're investigating thefts in the area, and just sort of takes off. Well, none of that really adds up. Who was this officer? The woman couldn't remember the name. So that seemed very curious. Who this officer may have been, what in the world was he doing at Wortman's apartment, and just coming up with some excuse to get out of there. Obviously wasn't expecting to see the woman there. Now the Examiner reports that this woman had given an earlier interview with the Mass Casualty Commission, but that earlier interview has not been published. So what's in that? What are they talking about? Why is it not published? Nobody says so. So there's that. Final thing I'll mention, just in case people haven't been following the news, political news out of Ottawa, the commissioner of the RCMP, there's another email that came out. You recall the meeting that Brenda Lucky, where she was talking to Darren Campbell and others in the RCMP in Nova Scotia, saying you should have released the make and model of the guns used by the gunman. And there was a big brouhaha about that. and the political pressure involved and all that. Well, it turns out that 5 days earlier, Commissioner Lucky had emailed the public safety minister to say, no, we can't release the makes and models of the guns because of ongoing investigations. So she has more questions to answer, I guess, what happened in those intervening 5 days to change her view from not releasing the information to, yes, we must release it. So we'll wait to hear more on that as that story grows and unfolds. So that was my summary for today. Tomorrow is going to start early at 8:30. There's going to be an further expert presentation on gender-based violence, and then we're going to get a foundational document presentation on violence that the perpetrator Wortman committed against Miss Banfield. Not sure exactly why we're getting a foundational document describing that when she's going to be called as a witness on Friday, so we'll see what that means when we hear the presentation tomorrow. So that was it for today, day 45 of the Mass Casualty Commission proceeding. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, share with a friend, all those good things if you enjoy this content. And otherwise, we'll catch up with you tomorrow. So thanks again, and see you next time.